Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today, we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. To Israel we go. We, under the Federal Communications Commission, we have to give equal time. We had his brother on the other day, so we have to give equal time to Rabbi Moshe Taragin. He's a rabbi at Yeshiva Har Etzion Gush, which is a Hesed Yeshiva. He went to Yeshiva University in New York. He's a columnist for the Jerusalem Post, and his new book is called Dark Clouds Above Faith Below, looking at the impact of October 7th and religion. Good to have you on the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be part, and nice to reach out to everyone back on the other side of the pond.
Yeah, you're originally from New York, right? It's
Yeah, we're one family. Very fond memories of New York. Go back a lot. But like I said, the war has allowed us to bridge our hearts and to bridge our tears.
Listen, October 7th was a watershed moment for Israel on many different fronts, but what about faith? How did it affect people's religion? You hear a story about people who became more religious, and there may be people who became less religious. You've been monitoring. What have you encountered? What have you found?
One of my mentors lived through the Holocaust, very, very famous Rabbi Amital, very well known in this country. And I once asked him that question about the Holocaust. I said, what were you thinking? Which of your friends? So he told me, again, it's a small sample size, he told me that basically he thought those who entered the Holocaust with strong faith retained it. Those who entered the Holocaust with fragile or brittle faith, they lost it. I tend to view it that way. Again, I haven't performed a survey, haven't asked people. I would say, though, people have a lot of questions. We have to train ourselves that questions is not a religious breakdown. Questions means you assume there's some method to the madness. This is a time of perplexion and a time of confusion. So when you ask questions of Hashem, you ask questions of God, it doesn't mean you're disobedient. It means you're trying to find something that you can justify and live with. And as long as you know you may walk away without answers, and that's where faith sets in, the ability to carry questions on your shoulders.
As long as you're able to ask questions of God. In fact, when you're dealing with the Shemitah year, the Torah records the fact that you're going to say on the 6th year, what am I going to eat? You're challenging God. And God says, okay, I'm going to give you for 3 years worth. As long as you have a dialogue with God, even if you may be questioning, and it's still important. If you don't have a dialogue, that's when you're in trouble.
Right. Then you're not interested. You slip into apathy.
I mean,
a lot of people. I'm sorry?
Now, Moshe Feinstein has a great story where somebody asked him a question. My son is marrying out of the faith. Should I sit Shiva? And Moshe said, no, you should call him every day, every week to find out how he's doing. If you sit Shiva, you can't have a resurrection of the dead. You got to keep the communication open. I think that's the beauty of Judaism. Even if we question and challenge, as long as there's a communication, there's still hope.
Sometimes the challenge gets very disobedient, but even that's a relationship. In the 19th century, the British Reform movement started something called a Kol Nidre ball. It's called Neshef Kol Nidre. Because they said, we're not part of the tradition. We're going to dance the night away. We're going to have a banquet. We're going to get dressed up and eat whatever we want. And then there was a team of even more radical people, the anarchists, who were angry. Why are you making a Kol Nidre ball? Well, it's a regular night. You shouldn't even mark the night with a Kol Nidre. The fact you're making a Kol Nidre ball shows you still think it's important. And that's when people rebel. That's still a relationship.
By the way, in New York, they had it too. I think there was a riot. If I remember correctly, there was a Kol Nidre ball riot, maybe on the Lower East Side, maybe 100 and some years ago. I'm just trying to recollect that. But as long as people grapple with faith, there's always hope with that. But are people despondent religiously because of what happened? You're living in Israel. What are you sensing?
I don't think they're despondent religiously. I think there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of suffering. And I've been very careful, not always successfully, while I'm trying to tease out ideas from this encounter and provide people with ideas, ideology. What is this war about beyond the military encounter? What is this about regarding Hashem's presence in this world? Why is the culture broken, and why is a broken culture being weaponized against us? Before I talk about all these layers, it's just a lot of suffering. People have lost loved ones. The movie was sent out yesterday with these girls. I mean, they're 18, 17-year-old girls, and you see the horrific, grisly images. So I think there's a lot of pain, and we try not to run away from the pain. but to share the pain, and just to, when people cry, when people, every night you see on the news, a mother, a survivor, a brother, a husband. So the first step is to be a human being and to cry with your people before you run to the ideological train of ideas.
And on the other hand, people have embraced faith because of it. You see more people getting involved in kosher, and you see open miracles. To me, there's a big miracle of October 7th, despite the fact that Hamas did the incredible, the devastation, the rape, the torture, is that it could have been worse because originally Iran and Hezbollah was supposed to be involved in there too. The fact that it only was Hamas and not Hezbollah too, I think was a great miracle.
I agree with you. Also, while we're talking about miracles, right before the war broke out, October 7th, the war broke out, right before we were attacked, brutally attacked, we had a terrible year of social unrest. Horrible, horrible protests, name-calling, libel, slander. I ask myself very often, if the war had happened 6 months later, after October 7th, would we have been so far divided that we would have been incapable of uniting and fighting the way we did? So timing is also everything. Thank God we were still united enough by one common story to protect our land, to put down our placards and our protests and join together in this battle. So,
well, Iran basically said, Hamas said that the reason why they attacked was because they saw this unity.
Yeah,
they were capitalizing on that.
Yeah, I wrote on one of my articles a couple of weeks ago. As a human being, as a person, as part of Jewish history, I'm so pained when one Jew calls another Jew a Nazi. Like, I don't even understand that. But after October 7th, any Jew that uses that term about another Jew, in my opinion, shouldn't learn Torah, shouldn't daven. It's such a betrayal of Jewish history.
Well, listen, look in the Turek Harta. They actually went to Iran to offer condolences when the president of Iran was killed in a helicopter crash. They're marching with the enemies of the Jewish people. They're basically embracing Hamas, Hezbollah, and I think we don't really talk about them very much. We look at them as a fringe group, but they do damage.
Yeah, they do PR damage. But again, just to be fair, they're small bunch of crack ups, and they're not Jewish. I mean, most poskim will say you can't eat their wine, drink their wine, eat their meat. They basically walked out of Judaism.
Now, you're, of course, at the Yeshiva Har Tzion, the Gush, a very Zionistic yeshiva. There was an article written by Aharon Lopiansky, Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshiva Greater Washington, in the Pesach issue of Mishpacha magazine, and he feels that the Haredi approach to Zionism was vindicated. In this quote, for almost 200 years, the common wisdom was that all our woes were a byproduct of our homeless existence. The solution was thought to be obvious. If difficult, become a normal people, have a country that is yours, and everything will fall in place. Sure, there'll be birth pangs, but those are productive pains, like that of a dislocated shoulder being pulled into place. Once that initial stage is passed, life should be natural and smooth. But can anybody explain how almost a century later, with magnificent armed forces, sophisticated and brave beyond words, we are still no safer than we were at the beginning of our venture, that no fewer Jews are killed in the ongoing skirmishes than in the pogroms of Europe?
Well, look, he's a very complex and sophisticated thinker, so and I'm not going to respond to what he did or didn't say. I didn't read the article. But I say you have to divide between two questions. Herzl had a dream, and that dream has been ruptured. Herzl's vision was that with our return to our land, we can assume our place amongst the nations and anti-Semitism will die. No religious person ever believed that. We believe anti-Semitism is baked into history. Halacha Esav son of Yaakov. It will end when history ends.
By the way, how can we say Esav son of Yaakov, the descendant of Esav hate Yaakov? Why don't we say the descendants of Yishmael hate Yaakov too?
Look, it's a good question. It's a broader question. Where is Yishmael in all the Nevuos? Where is Yishmael in the Arba Malachim? It's a really good question. Why does Yishmael factor? Probably because there are two different systems of opposition. There's the confrontation of politics, where we face empires. And there's a confrontation of ideas and theology, where we face Yishmael. Because Christianity isn't really monotheism. It's a warped form of monotheism. Whereas Islam is pretty close, and you have to tease out the differences. So I definitely feel that Herzl's dream is dead, but I don't think religious people subscribe to the dream. We know anti-Semitism is not about the fact that we're foreigners in a host country. What Rabbi Lopiansky's article alludes to, at least the section that you read about, is that sometimes messianic thought generates simplistic expectations. And people think it's going to be easy and immediate and electrifying and overall of history. I was never trained that way. To me, we're starting a process. It could take 300 years. It could take 30 years. It could be easy. It could be hard. Chazal speak about it. So Rabbi Lopiansky is right. For those who thought it would be a snapping your finger and everything would fall into place and the Arabs would just disappear into thin air, those ideas have been
Anybody
dashed.
really believe that? I don't think anybody really believed that. We always knew that we're going to have problems. And since 1948, we were faced by hostile armies. 1967, look at the Yom Kippur War of 1993. And look at the Hamas wars we had about Hezbollah. Who thought that they were going to disappear? I don't think we believed that.
Well, I think some people, the second that adversity set in, they gave up their messianic hope. So let's say after Oslo, people stopped saying I'm not getting into the politics of whether you use that statement.
Was a movement, the Messianic movement, which disappeared in the course of history.
Right. But certainly, I don't think that redemption means everything's just going to simply line up like a row of ducks. It's still difficult. We hope that the Cheved and Mashiach are easy, but we know that. But all that being said, it's a privilege to live through this period. And what would your great-great-grandfather give to deal with the problems we have rather than the problems he had?
Well, the difference is October 7th was one day, and Israel rebounded October 8th. And the Holocaust, we went through many years where Jews were being killed with nobody able to defend or willing, and Jews couldn't defend themselves. So that's a very, very big difference. Our guest is Rabbi Moshe Taragin. He's a rabbi yeshiva Har Etzion Gush. He is also a columnist for the Jerusalem Post. His brand new book is called Dark Clouds Above Faith Below. It's by Kodesh Press with essays of articles dealing with faith and October 7th. You mentioned you don't like using, there's an expression that's been used by religious Zionists as Chalta de Gula, that the creation of the state of Israel is the beginning of the redemptive process. You don't subscribe to that?
I do, but I try to create terminology. I've got another book coming out in a few months. My contention is, maybe right, maybe wrong, that 70% of our people believe in 80% about the same issues about redemption. So there's a common denominator that unites us, but we spend so much time ideologically clobbering each other about the 20 or 30% we disagree with, whether Jewish sovereignty is the hand of God, whether the state is religious in it. So I want to try to create a vocabulary that a Jew in, Teaneck and a Jew in Lakewood can both subscribe to. And I think Eschalta de Gula creates a lot of hives and allergies for people. I like to use the word the fourth room. Divide Jewish history into 4 rooms. The first room is pre-Har Sinai, 2,448 years. Second room, the golden age of Jewish monarchy and universalism, 2448 till 70 AD. The third room was the rabbinic room, the long exile where we had only rabbinic Torah and nothing else for Jewish identity. We're now in the fourth room. The fourth room is the end of history. I think most people can subscribe to that because there's been such shifts in our world. Phrases like Achalta de Gula, Rishis Michas Gula Seino evoke ideas for some that cause confusion for others.
Even though I asked Rav Shlomo Aviner, the Rosh Yeshiva of Ateret Kohanim, are we the beginning of the Gula, Chalta the Gula, beginning of the redemptive process? He screamed at me, no, we're Be'emsa Hagul, we're in the midst of the Gula, right? So everybody has a different perspective, but certainly the fact that you have, I would say, that we might be able to bring back Yovel because the majority of Jews in the world are living in Israel. So the fact is, though, it's a miracle that more Jews, I believe, live in Israel than anywhere else around the world. That's a miracle in itself. We have the ingathering of the exiles. Certainly, we're in a pre-messianic stage where we have been in a position we haven't been in 2,000 years.
You're preaching to the choir.
And I think there's even a shift in the Haredi community. First of all, in Israel, I think more of them are going to be joining the army. Even in America, I think, with the exception of some small strains of anti-Zionism or non-Zionism, I think people are appreciating Israel more because Ariel Sharon, who is not a religious Jew, he said that the reason why a Jew in New York could walk with his head high is because there's a state of Israel.
Right. It'll happen. Look, the Haredi community, by definition, I come from that community. I was trained, I went to school in Brooklyn, in Kamenetz Yeshiva in Borough Park.
Oh, yeah? Torah Semis Kamenetz?
Yeah.
We're on 13th Avenue and 49th Street? And
40... No, the new one, 56th Street, 16th and 17th.
So I went to 13th Avenue and 43rd Street, Yeshiva Torah Semis Kamenetz. But I didn't go to the high school, but I went to elementary school.
I got the upgraded version.
But Haredi schools are different today than when you went there or when I went there, for sure.
Yeah.
In fact, my father went to Chaim Blind in Brownsville, New York. You know, his classmate was Rabbi Lichtenstein.
Oh, wow.
Chaim Berlin. I have the yearbook. It's a different yearbook, different look than what it is. You would not recognize Chaim Berlin today from the Chaim Berlin of the 1940s.
Like, you're smart enough to know that history is cyclical, not linear. And what comes around goes around. And you just have to see the long view. They'll get caught in the short view.
Absolutely. But, you know, we do face, and how do we deal with, for example, the Arabs, the Ishmaelim, the Asavs, which I know that's been historically considered the Catholic Church, even though there are differences of opinion what that all means. But we are set. In fact, according to the Zohar, they say at the end of days there's going to be a war between the Catholic Church and the Islamists, between Esav and Yishmael.
Look, my Rebbe, Rav Amital, used to tell the following story. There was a man named Mendel whose job it was in the shtetl to wake everyone up during Chodesh Elul for davening. And he was relentless. And by Erev Rosh Hashanah, he was exhausted because he had spent his whole time waking everyone up. So Rosh Hashanah, he's falling asleep over his machzor. So everyone starts nudging him and throwing things at him to wake up Mendel. And he looks at them bloody-eyed. He says, "Let me sleep. Ich bin verschlafen." And they say, "Mendel, you kept us awake all Chodesh Elul. You think we're going to let you sleep now that it's Rosh Hashanah?" We are the world's Mendel. We're the Mendel of the world shtetl. For 2,000 years, we kept the world awake, and we didn't let them slip into savagery and violence and sexual promiscuity and paganism. We're the world's conscience. We challenge them. And because we challenge them, we're hated because no one likes a whistleblower. That's Chazal's view of anti-Semitism. It all started in Har Sinai because Hashem chose us. So, you could trace it sociologically, politically, ethnically, economically, culturally. But Chazal saw it as built into history.
No, and we have to deal with Amalek. You talk about Amalek in your book too, which is the traditional hater, killer of Jews going back to biblical times.
Yeah.
Would you say who is Amalek today, aside from Hamas?
The Rambam Shita, so we don't really have a genealogical Amalek, but Amalek at some point in history, there's a very famous Rav Hutner in the Pachad Yitzchak, which essentially Haman switches the game plan of Amalek from a nation to an insidious force that infiltrates other nations. So Haman takes the Persian Empire and infuses it with Amalek poison. And then he shifts the strategy where Amalek is no longer a people. Amalek is now a force of evil in our world that exploits other forces in the world.
I think doesn't the Rav say that it's not necessarily genes, it's people who have an ideological hate of Jews that are really Amalek.
Right, but not to kill them, but certainly to.
Right. No, today we're not allowed to kill Amalek. We have to wait to the Messianic times, and then maybe they'll disappear. Even though I find fascinating that the children, B'nai Haman, the children of Haman, who wanted to annihilate all Jews, studying Torah B'nai Brak, and according to some opinions, Rabbi Akiva was that individual.
Right. Chazal felt that he had more than 10 kids. People don't know that. How could the grandchildren study?
According to the Medrash, right? 50 kids. I don't know how he had time to hate Jews, but
happy wife, happy life. Yeah.
Right, but his wife wasn't such a happy wife, and she wasn't that good. I always fascinated the language when he was Zeresh, his wife, with his loved ones. It just made some distinctions. I don't think he had a happy life, but he wasn't a happy person. That's probably part of his problems. But
her name was Zeresh. She had him wrapped around her finger, like every girl. What do you think?
Okay, she did have her brown finger, but it was complicated. If you read the Megillah, you read the Midrashim, are certainly very beautiful. But how do we? And again, this is something we alluded to earlier. The reason why, one of the reasons, listen, Hamas was planning this for a long time to attack Israel in this fashion. They're working with Iran, Hezbollah, other groups as well. The reason why they chose this date is because they saw an opportunity because we were busy fighting each other. In Israel, you have a secular religious divide, and even in the Orthodox community, the Frum community, you have a divide between the Mizrahi and the Haredim, especially when it comes to army service. How do we bridge all these problems?
The war is great because it doesn't just speak of unity, but it creates unity. When you're in a battalion, you could be a Rebbe, you could be a plumber, you could be a bus driver. There's no hierarchy. Everyone performs the same mission, throws their life on the line. So those that serve in the army have experienced not the unity of speech, but the unity of action, and they're together. The issue with Haredim is a little bit harder because we don't go through those common experiences. Ultimately, a people is only as united as the common narrative, and that's what we're losing in Israel. For the first 50, 60 years in Israel, we had a common story. The story was we're recovering from the Holocaust and building a safe haven for our people. As we went from that story to the story of being a startup nation, we started to lose a common story. And I hope this war will restore that story, that we are still hated, and we have to defend our country, whether we live in our lone shvut, where I live, or Queens, wherever you're coming from. And it's all of our responsibility. I think for Americans, we started to take Israel a little bit too much for granted. understandably, you just jet in, stay in a hotel, leave, buy your apartment. And you guys realize that it's not something you can take for granted. Every single one of us, each in their own way, has to defend our country. If we don't, we'll lose it. Once that story becomes our story, then you have unity. America's lost its story. Why does America not have unity? Because no story. For 200 years, your story was a city on the hill trying to bring democracy to the world. Well, you did it. What's your next story? Story's not an iPhone. Story's got to be something larger, an idea that people rally around. That's why it's so polarized, because what do you live for? We have a story, we just have to restore it and re-amplify it.
Yeah, but in 1967, we had unity too. In fact, I think one of the leading modern Zionists rabbis said the reason why in 1948 we didn't have Jerusalem, we were fighting with each other. We had unity in 1967. That's why we got back Jerusalem, which represents unity. But that's short-lived. I just concerned we're starting to see the fissures again, where officially it's the family of the hostages, but you have the anti-democracy with the anti-judicial reform movement. So there's actually the rallies are getting bigger. So some of the fissures we saw before October 7th, unfortunately, we're seeing it again. And that's our biggest problem, is the disunity.
You're absolutely correct. My hope is, I'm not sure if it will come true, but these are the last gasps of a polarized political spectrum. And once we refresh ourselves, we'll start to vote for politicians, not based on their platforms, but based on the unifying capacity. I hope that we're going to learn from this. These are the old school. The old school, they don't know how to not fight with one another. Once they reach the next stage, hopefully there'll be more calm voices that look for unifying features. I'm hoping. I'm saying.
I want to thank you for joining us, Rabbi Moshe Taragin. His fascinating book is called Dark Clouds Above Faith Below. And I know that you're coming out with another book soon too, right? That's what you mentioned?
Yeah, it's a book about redemption. I've been planning it about 2 years, and I'm trying to hit that middle spot, the Goldilocks zone, that 80% of the Jewish people can feel comfortable talking about redemption in a sophisticated way rather than defaulting to simple platitudes and ideological clobber. We'll see. Hopefully it will work.
The book is available from Kodesh Press. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and we should hear only good times, and there'll be better days.
Amen.
Thank you for tuning in to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
All right, great.
Everything sounds better.